Welcome to State Lobbying Heroes Podcast, a podcast where we delve into the careers and personal life stories of some of the best and the brightest state government relations experts. I'm your host, Deepak, CEO of Legistracker. I hope everyone is safe and well during this pandemic. Today, I have a lobbyist from Georgia, Kenyatta Mitchell. Kenyatta was active in politics since childhood, even writing letters to the governor. Her interest naturally led her into studying history and international politics. After that, how did Kenyatta get into lobbying? How did she progress in her career eventually to become a principal of Paramount Consulting Group? We explored Kenyatta's career path in this episode. Here it goes. Hi, Kenyatta. Thank you so much for joining the show. I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. This is great.
Perfect. Usually the way I conduct these interviews is I kind of ask you questions starting from your childhood. So let's start there. Did you grow up in Georgia or how was your childhood? Just talk us through it.
So I actually grew up in Michigan. So I came to Georgia when I was 17 years old to go to Clark, Atlanta. I went to Clark for undergraduate. I had an undergraduate degree in history and a graduate degree in international affairs. And then once I graduated, I started working for the governor's office. Well, I started working for the Black Caucus. And then I left the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus and started working for Governor Barnes. This is way back when we had Democratic governors. So I worked for Governor Barnes Law that year. And then I started working for Governor Sonny Perdue. He kept me on in the governor's office in the Office of Planning and Budget. So in my job in the Office of Planning and Budget, we did the budgets for DOT, transportation, forestry, economic development. So those were my focuses.
So we can just slow down a bit here. So I just wanted to know more about your childhood. So you were in Michigan and you grew up there until 17 years old. So how was your childhood like? Were you always interested in politics or did that like naturally grow in you? What happened there?
Yeah, so I grew up in politics. My father helped the mayor of Detroit get elected. My parents were very active in unions, so they did a lot of work in the unions. I'm actually named after the president of Kenya. My father worked with him. My father went to Kenya and helped organize their labor unions and their labor organizations in Kenya for a year. So it's in my blood. So there's really nothing else I could do, I don't think.
That's so cool. So when you were in high school and before that, were you like participating in a lot of political activities or were you like in the debate group or anything like that?
So no, I wasn't in debate, but I was always very politically active. I was the little kid who used to write the governor. So every time I would watch the news and I would write the governor and tell him what I thought about what he was doing.
That is so cool. Do you have any of those copies still around?
I have to look for him because he would write me back and longhand write me back.
That is so nice.
So it was kind of funny. It's kind of funny. But I would critique what he did.
That is amazing. And being at such a young age, thinking of such stuff is like really, commendable.
Well, my parents were in the union, so we would go to protests. We protest Nelson Mandela being in jail. We protested apartheid. We protested chemicals that they put on fruit and vegetables. We protest how they treated immigrants.
Wow.
If there was a cause, we were protesting.
That is so amazing.
Yeah.
So this was like back when was this? This was 1990s, 2000?
This was in the 80s and primarily the 80s. Primarily. The 90s, I was in high school, so I was too cool for all that in high school. But junior high, I was absolutely a protester.
Wow. You should share some pictures at some point as to how you were. That is so cool. So after high school, then you said you went to Clark Atlanta University. Where was this? This was in Atlanta.
Clark Atlanta is in the western area of Atlanta. So from the state capital, it's about 3 miles away from the state capital of Georgia.
Okay. And what made you move from Michigan to Georgia?
Weather. So Michigan is very cold.
Yes, I agree.
Georgia is much warmer. Plus, Michigan was having a really hard time there at that time economically. So I knew to be able to do better financially, it would be best for me to leave. Now Michigan's a lot better, but during that time, if you were college educated, you probably left.
I was in Cleveland for about 7 years.
Yeah.
And back then, there was a rivalry between Detroit and Cleveland in
Hmm.
NBA. So yeah, I used to love watching those games. Yeah, but yeah, I feel very close to Detroit. So it was you took history and international politics in Clark Atlanta University.
Right.
And can you tell us a little bit about what that course was all about?
So history, I looked at history as being foundational. So I think history is kind of like math in that it's a foundation of a lot of things. So I use that just as a counterpoint. It helps me tremendously in lobbying because you understand why people do some of the things that they do based on past events or past issues. So much of what happens in Georgia is because of the Civil War and because of Reconstruction and because of Atlanta being burned to the ground. I mean, so
Mhm.
much of the current history of Atlanta is based on things that happened over 100 years ago. The historically Black colleges that are here, that were land granted after the Civil War, tremendously changed the trajectory of Atlanta. And it's one of the things I think that makes Atlanta successful is unlike other parts of the country, you have so many college educated, master's level and PhD level minorities in this area. It made it very difficult for segregationists to be as powerful here as they were in other parts of the state, just because there were so many educated people. Also, because Coca-Cola is headquartered here, Delta, all of these companies were headquartered here, unlike most of the South, where they had northern companies that had bases here. Well, those northern companies that had a base here, they didn't care if there was a riot or they didn't care. They didn't live here. They just wanted to make sure their factories ran. It's
Got
totally different if you are the president of Coke and you live on West Paces Ferry. And if there's a riot, it could affect you personally. So
Mhm.
you have a vested interest in making sure that things work out. And because you have historically Black colleges, you have people who you feel are your peers who you can talk to, people who are educated, upper middle class people who you can sit down and talk to. I think that is a lot of the reason why Atlanta is in the situation it is right now, which is
Mhm.
being a very successful southern city.
That's a very good insight you bring in. And the international politics, what was that about? I mean, was it like learning about overseas, how the politics plays and how does it impact the United States? How does that work?
So Clark didn't really have an international politics degree. It was something that we kind of patched together. So my master's degree is actually in political science, but my coursework was different than a political science student because I wanted an international focus. So this degree was tailored a bit for what I wanted. So I took a lot more international affairs classes. So I was very interested I did my thesis on the Russian mafia and Russian organized crime and how that impacted the government and how it impacts our government to this day. A lot of leaders in the Russian government now are people who we would consider to be organized crime leaders. I did a lot of research on women in the workplace internationally. So how in a lot of countries women were the people who were able to get factory jobs and how that changed their position in the family, how they went from being considered a detriment to the family to an asset. I did a lot of research on female infanticide. There are a lot of countries that kill their baby daughters in favor of sons, and how that has a huge gender imbalance, and how that changes the stability in places like China, parts of India, Bangladesh, that have these huge female infanticide, and how that changes politics. So that's just some of the research. I did a lot of research on the United Nations and the World Health Organization. So it's very helpful in international affairs because people come to this country with a set of cultural bases and cultural standings. And it's very useful to see how this country is going to change in the future as our complexion changes.
That is interesting. And do you think having that perspective, learning as to what's happening outside the United States, has helped you in your lobbying career?
Oh, absolutely. So I've done work with Middle Eastern countries, Bahrain. I've done some work with Kuwait and Qatar. It's very helpful because a lot of Americans have a innate bias against Muslim countries, which I think is crazy. And it's something I just don't have because when you look at these growing dynamic economies, who want to work and who want to do business with the United States. And there are a lot of major companies who will not do business there based on ignorance. They just do work in the United States and they don't want to do work anywhere else. And you have the U.S. is only 5% of the world's population. So, I mean, you gotta you gotta get out. You
Right.
gotta do more.
And on a lighter note, have you been to any of these countries you've talked about?
Oh yeah. So my husband and I travel a lot. So obviously, because of my name, I've been to Kenya. We've been to India, Dubai, Colombia. We've been to Argentina,
Oh,
Costa
wow.
Rica. I mean, we've been to a lot of countries.
Holy moly. Okay. I envy you.
Yeah.
And what, any favorite country?
It's too many. Peru is stunning. Peru is like a postcard. Croatia is stunning. Gosh, Cuba feels like home. I'm Catholic, and it's just a very Afro-Catholic community. It feels like home. So I mean, there's so many countries that I loved. India. India is beautiful. The food was amazing. I think I gained 5 or 10 pounds in India.
Sorry.
Everywhere I went, people were offering me food and I couldn't stop eating it. And I love spicy food, so it was just the spicy food and the chai. I overindulged.
That is
Oh, and naan bread. I can't forget about naan bread.
yes.
Yeah.
Um, so after you graduated, then you became a political analyst at the Georgia governor's office. Am I right?
Yes.
So how did you get into it? How did you end up in that job? And what was really cool about that job?
So the Black Caucus in Georgia really looked out for me. I was working with the Black Caucus and Chairman Smyrie, who was chair of the Rules Committee at the time, he's still in the General Assembly, thought that the governor's office should diversify. And there's several other folks in the governor's office who thought that the governor's office should diversify. And they started looking for qualified minority talent. And that's how I was picked up. So I owe my career to the Black Caucus. I owe my career to Chairman Smyrie, and I owe my career to Carl Von Epps. He was state rep who was over the Black Caucus. All those folks helped me get to where I am.
So can you tell us this is a very naive question here, what does the Black Caucus do?
So the Black Caucus, interest groups within the General Assembly have a caucus. So there is a caucus for people who are under 40 years old, who are elected officials. The Asian Pacific members have a caucus. The LGBT, our gay and lesbian and trans folks have a caucus. Women have a caucus, and then both political parties, the Democrats and Republicans, each have a caucus. And what caucuses do is that they come together and they say, these issues are very, very important to this specific group, whether they be women or Democrats or Republicans or African Americans. And so they come together with a suite of legislative priorities and appropriations priorities that they think would best benefit those communities.
Okay. And then they have people fight for those rights and maybe introduce legislation?
Absolutely. So they introduce legislation and they tend to vote as a block. So each of the members of the Black Caucus could come together and say, I think there's 71 members, I have to check how many now, we're going to vote together as a block on this legislation. And then all they have to do is get the additional members that they would need to get a majority and it passes.
Interesting. And your job as a political analyst, you were there for about 6 years.
I was.
And then you moved on to the Fulton County government. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did you get into it and what was that about?
So I actually started my own company at that time. So Fulton County was one of my contracts that I had. I helped them start their international economic development department. So Fulton County had been doing economic development primarily domestically. So they were trying to get domestic businesses to locate in Fulton County. They decided that it would be best to try to get an international economic development department. And that's where I helped them create that department within Fulton County.
Mm-hmm. And that was for how long were you there?
It was about a year I had that contract, yeah.
Okay, so that was one of your projects when you
That was one of my contracts, yes.
Okay. So what else did you do when you set up your own company back then?
So I did that. I did some international work. So I helped do trade delegations. So I helped bring Bahraini officials over to the United States to bring trade prospects back to Bahrain. So we got them in connection with like Newell Rubbermaid and a bunch of other companies to do business with Bahrain, which is a very small, very wealthy country that a lot of these big companies hadn't done business with.
So how do you begin? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, when you say you have these international connections, so where do you begin with? How do you get started? Do you just reach out to them? I mean, like, how do you even get connections there?
I just reached out to them. So what I did was I constantly am reading trade publications, blogs, and I found out that there was a delegation that was interested in coming to Atlanta. So I reached out to them. I reached out to the lobbying firm who was bringing them over, told them I had connections in Georgia, and gave them. So it was just completely a cold call. And they hired me on to help with this delegation. And I've done that for other countries as well. But once, it's really just cold calling and sending your information to them. And they chose me.
Wow, that is amazing. So after that, so how long did you do this for, like on your own? You said you had your company and then you became the vice chairperson. So what happened? So how did you transition to that?
So I had my own company until the financial crisis. So once the financial crisis hit, my business dried up. So after that happened, I went on and worked for Waste Management, and I was with Waste Management for about 7 years. So I helped at Waste. I was their regional public sector rep. So I was one of their lobbyists at the state capitol, as well as I helped them with large municipal contracts. So for example, if you were in a city that privatizes their garbage pickup, those tend to be very big projects, very expensive, very big projects that have to go through the city council or county commission. So I would make sure that we had the votes available to get that business from the county commissioners or city council members. And then after that, I managed the contract and made sure we were doing what we said we were going to do for the length of the agreement.
So this was when you were with Waste Management.
It is, yeah.
So what is City of Atlanta Board of Ethics? I saw that on your bio as well.
Yeah, so I was appointed to the Board of Ethics. So the Board of Ethics is a free, it's a volunteer position, and if there's an ethical violation with a member who is either a City of Atlanta employee or on a City of Atlanta Board or Commission, they were able to come before you and plead their case. We also came up with recommendations for City Council and ethics changes. That board is still around, and there's still folks on it who are serving, but I'm off that board.
Okay, got it. And then after that, you became an associate and a senior associate at PwC, is that right?
So that's when I had my own company. So I did some work with PricewaterhouseCoopers. I helped them with economic development projects, tax credits, and things like that. So it's kind of a continuation of everything I've done.
Got it. So when you set up again your company, how do you reach out? How did you reach out to potential customers? Again, was it cold calling or was it through referrals? How did it work out?
It was all of that. So it was references, it was cold calling, it was really being diligent about reading the newspaper and blogs and trade publications, anything that you could get your hands on, and just bidding on projects. So sometimes you bid on projects, sometimes you will call people that you know and see if there's an opportunity. So it's everything.
And what would you say is your forte? I mean, it looks like you have a lot of diverse expertise, but is there anything specific which comes to mind which you would say that that's my strength in case of like lobbying?
My strength is kind of getting the right people together in a room. So as being a subject matter expert, my subject matter expertise is obviously in environmental work. It's in transportation, because when I was at Waste Management is a transportation and logistics company. I've done a lot of things in travel and hospitality. I've done a lot of work with the port and the World Congress Center. So economic development, transportation, natural resources are my expertise, as well as getting, even if it's not my expertise, it's really getting two people together who need to speak to each other. I have a really strong Rolodex, so I'm able to, if I don't know it, I can get to the person who knows it and get them to the person who needs the information.
Interesting. So after that, so once you were with PwC, you worked with them for about 3 years. And then
Right.
you saw your bio, now it says waste management. So was that, did I get that around? Did I flip it around your career?
So what I did was I did all of my consulting work. So I didn't put my company's name down. I just did who I worked for when I had my own company.
Got it. Okay.
And then waste management's after that.
I see. So after all of that, now you're with Paramount Consulting Group. So before we jump into this side of it, can you tell us like what was one of the key projects which you worked on? With any of the projects you worked with all of your previous experience, which was the project which stands out for you and why?
Oh, wow. The project that stands out for me is when I was at the governor's office. At the governor's office, we were starting to buy mega sites. So mega sites are large areas where you can do major economic development activities. So we were trying to bring in Daimler Chrysler, and that was back when Daimler Chrysler existed. So it was a mega project. So we had to negotiate with Daimler, who is a German company, Chrysler, the American company. They both had their prospective headquarters, and they wanted to bring a factory to Pooler, Georgia, which is near Savannah, because they wanted to be near. That was a project that took 2 years of my life. So I had to sign away confidentiality agreements. I could not even tell my husband what I was working on, and it was a huge project. It didn't work out because Daimler Chrysler split, and there was a financial issue where it didn't make sense. But because of our work, we were able to bring Kia. So the Kia plant near LaGrange, Georgia, is there because of a lot of our legwork and trying to get an automotive factory. And there's been a huge economic boom in that area because they have a plant, and they also have all of the other, seatbelt companies, companies that make seats, companies that make all these different things that you need in a car are all located around there. And it was because of our work. It started with Governor Barnes, and then Governor Perdue was able to have that complete. That's one of the biggest things that I worked on. I'm very proud of it.
That is so cool to hear that. You guys do a lot of work behind the scenes, which probably doesn't get published anywhere, and I appreciate that side of it. So the circle comes around. So now you're at Paramount Consulting Group. How did you end up in this position, and what is it that you guys do here?
So I ended up because Theron Johnson, who was the president, recruited me. I was interested in leaving waste management. I'd been there for a while, and I wanted some new kind of adventures and opportunities. This is the first time that I've ever been a contract lobbyist where we have a lot of different lobbying contracts. Usually when I lobbied for one entity at a time. What we do is we do kind of everything from government affairs, so your basic lobbying, business development. We do crisis communications, public relations. We do a lot of campaign work. So right now, we're working on getting people to fill out their census form, so that's very important. And we're working on getting people out to vote, so that's also very important. So these are the things that we're working on right now.
So how do you go about it? When you say you have these different expertise, how did you, do you have multiple people working on different actions, or how do you divide your work, and how do you focus on each one at a time?
It depends. So there's some projects that we work on as a team. So for example, Expedia is one of our clients. Expedia is the vacation rental partially company. So we work with Airbnb, we work with the Vacation Rental Association on trying to get that legislation through. So it's a coalition. There's some things that we do where we help people by ourselves, primarily business development. We help them through the RFP process to be able to, in the beginning, kind of get in front of the folks they need to get in front of so that they understand what it is they can bring to the table, helping them draft and submit the RFPs and hopefully winning. So it really depends on the project. Some things are a group and some things are just our team, and some things are a member of our team individual. Depends on the project.
And do you lobby for a certain sector in the industries, or you don't put any restrictions that you guys can lobby for anyone, irrespective of whether they're from healthcare, transportation, environment, or anything like that?
We can lobby for anybody. The only thing is that companies prefer, so for example, we don't have these clients, but I'll give them as an example. So for example, if you have Target as a client, then you can't lobby for Walmart, right? Because those are competitors. So As long as there's no restriction on competition and we find that they want what they want to do is something that we feel is good for our morals and the integrity of the organization or something that we know that we can help them with, then we'll absolutely help.
Mhm.
So there's no industry. It's really just,
Okay.
there's certain things that we would never lobby for because we don't agree with it. But other than that, we're pretty open.
And is there any difference between your experience prior to Paramount Consulting and now that you're a contract lobbyist? What would you say would be the key difference?
Key difference. So when I was with waste management, your knowledge had to be very, very deep. So you had to be the person that your contract lobbyist brought for very, very specific, detailed subject matter expert information. So you had to be the person to answer those questions. When you're a contract lobbyist, your knowledge needs to be probably a little bit more shallow. You need to know just enough to kind of get in the door and have those initial questions and then to bring in people who can answer the very detailed things. So I would say that the knowledge is a little bit different. So as opposed to having a depth of knowledge in a particular subject matter, you have to have a decent amount of knowledge in a lot of different subject matters, depending on what your clients need.
And do you like this aspect of it?
I do. I felt like I learned everything I could about everything that I guess I wanted to about the environmental transportation logistics. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. And can you tell us how do you stay organized in terms of your day-to-day activities, and what kind of suggestions would you give for anyone who wants to get into lobbying?
So what I would say, kind of answering your last question first, to get into lobbying, you have to really kind of eat, sleep, and breathe government affairs. Lobbying is a 24/7 activity, right? So you're meeting with people for lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You're meeting people after work. You have to be really active reading newspapers, listening to podcasts. You have to kind of get all of this 360 knowledge of whatever areas of expertise you want to have, so whether that's state, local, or city government or federal government. And you have to really understand who the players are. So it's a lot. As far as organization, I'm a big note taker, take a lot of just pen and paper note. Many people use like Microsoft Teams or they use Slack, whatever it is that you can use to really ping yourself to say, okay, you need to talk to this person, you need to listen to this podcast, you need to read the paper. You just have to make sure that you have notes to ensure that you know where you need to be and know that kind of quiet time where you can do some research.
So, just to take one step deeper than that, what kind of newspaper do you prefer, and what kind of podcasts you listen to? Any other tools or anything which you use, like in terms of Twitter or anything like that, to get your information from?
So I absolutely listen to like political rewind. I listen to, here local Georgia podcasts and things like that. So I listen to those. Obviously I listen to and watch the Georgia game just so you can get abreast on local information. You have to read the Atlanta Business Chronicle. You have to read the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And then you absolutely have to spend as much time on Twitter. Twitter's huge for this field. Journalists always break news on Twitter, so you're able to find out things really quickly through Twitter. So I would say, if you're a lobbyist and you don't have your Twitter going all day, you're missing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree. Okay, so I think that's all the set of questions I had for you in terms of your career. Any kind of advice you would give to the upcoming lobbyists, which you can think of, like, this would really help you out?
as far as advice, the biggest thing I would say is spend time with a lot of different issues. I say that because I would have never thought in a million years I would be interested in transportation and logistics, but it's very interesting. And there's so many companies. When you think about Walmart, and you think about Home Depot, and you think about Delta, and you think about like waste management, they're all transportation logistics companies, UPS, Amazon. So you think about all of the biggest companies in the country, the biggest companies in the world, they are transportation and logistics. So a lot of people are very interested in subject matters, but I think finding something like healthcare is it's not my interest, but healthcare is a great future interest for a lobbyist. There's a lot of opportunity in medical devices, pharmacy, there's just a lot. So what I would say is spend a lot of time in a lot of different subject matters, international as well. I mean, you can lobby, if you're in DC, you can lobby for countries. You can be a country's representative to the federal government. So I just think open your eyes and make sure that you are open to a lot of different experiences and a lot of different opportunities, because a lot of people come out of college and they immediately want to work for Facebook, or they want to work for, somebody in a tech that they have experience with. But there's a lot of like Cisco or like AMD. There's a lot of behind the scenes tech that you may not think about that is hugely important, and they need lobby. So I just say broaden your scope.
Wise words. And I wanted to conclude, but I actually got two more questions for you. First is,
Okay.
do you guys even work with the federal, or you're like?
We do.
You do. Okay.
We do.
What kind of things you do there?
So we primarily work with the Georgia delegation for federal projects. So we don't do a lot in DC. So our Georgia congressmen and women, and we work with our Georgia senator for a lot of different projects. So that is our federal work, but not a lot in DC.
Okay. And the last question I had for you is, how do you see Atlanta and Georgia's politics shaping up in the next couple of years? What do you see in the future?
Well, demographics are destiny, right? So Georgia's roughly 30-some% Black African American. It's about 10% of all other ethnic groups. So that's right about 40%. That is hugely transformative in what the future of politics is going to look in Georgia. When I first started the General Assembly was just white and Black. Everybody was white, everybody was Black, everybody was straight. Everybody was, Christian. There was no diversity. And what I mean by no diversity is there was no real ethnic diversity, no real religious diversity, gender identity diversity. All of that is changing, and all of that is going to change. So we are going to find more and more gay, lesbian, and trans folks. We're going to find more people. And we already have Muslim elected officials. So we're going to have more people who are Islamic. We have quite a few Catholics now. There's just going to be a lot of change. A lot more women. A lot of people who are coming into the General Assembly are women. When I first started, Georgia was one of the lowest states in the country as far as the number of women in elected position. So we're getting a lot more IT people who have IT backgrounds, which is extremely important in trying to regulate those industries. So Georgia's just becoming much more diverse in all ways.
That's really good insight you bring in. So any parting words you wanna say something about yourself or Paramount Consulting Group? The floor is yours.
So I would be remiss if I didn't say that we are always open for new clients and new business. So feel free to reach out to Paramount Consulting Group. We love working using LegitTrack. So thank you, Deepak, for helping us keep ourselves organized. A lot of the new things that you're starting to add to the systems are insanely helpful because, as you know, we are on the go. So as much as we can pull up on our phones and as much as we can get pinged is great. So thank you for that. I mean, it's those types of systems that make our jobs so much easier. If you have information, we're in the information business, so information is key. So thank you.
Oh, sure, no problem. That's all I had. Thank you so much, Kenyatta, for spending this 30 to 40 minutes with me. I really do appreciate it. I learned a lot from you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Well, I learned a lot from Kenyatta's background. Hope you did too. Please drop in a comment about the episode or how I can improve these conversations. Thanks for joining me in another episode of State Lobbying Heroes podcast. Take care until next time.